In the late 1980s, General Motors, the company that perfected mass production, built a factory in Lansing, Michigan, where small teams assembled a two-seat Buick by hand. No traditional assembly line. Station by station, the quality was measurably superior. And then GM quietly killed the entire program, not because the craftsmanship failed, but because something far more unforgiving did. In the late 1980s, Buick's position inside General Motors was slipping. Once a byword for quiet luxury and upward mobility, the brand found itself boxed in from every side. Japanese imports like the Acura Legend and Toyota Cressida were redefining what buyers expected from a premium car, with smoother engines, tighter build quality, and a fresh sense of style. Younger buyers, drawn to BMW and Mercedes, saw Buick's lineup as old-fashioned. Even within General Motors, Buick was wedged between Oldsmobile's push for technology and Cadillac's claim to top-tier status. By 1986, Buick's average buyer was among the oldest in the industry. Sales trended downward, and the brand's image looked stale next to the excitement of turbocharged Pontiacs or the engineering polish of Lexus, which was preparing to enter the United States market. General Motors' own internal surveys showed that when people thought of Buick, words like reliable and comfortable came up, but so did conservative and safe. Not the qualities that spark showroom traffic or magazine covers. Pressure mounted from inside General Motors' executive suites. The company's planners, facing a market that was fragmenting into niches, needed a way to make Buick relevant again. They studied what worked for other brands. For example, a halo car, not just a flashy model, but a rolling statement of intent. Something that would change the conversation about Buick, even if it did not sell in high numbers. The idea was simple in theory: create a limited production two-seat coupe with advanced electronics, hand-finished quality, and a price tag that reached for the aspirational. If the Corvette could draw attention to Chevrolet, and the Elante aimed to lift Cadillac, then Buick needed its own halo. The stakes were not just about sales volume. They were about perception, about giving dealers and customers a reason to believe Buick could compete with the world's best. That's how the Reatta was born, not as a response to a market segment, but as a calculated risk to rescue a brand's future. The question that followed was how to build a car that could live up to the story General Motors wanted to tell. GM's top planners did not just authorize a new car, they authorized a new way of building cars. The Reatta would not be squeezed onto an existing assembly line in Flint or Detroit. Instead, executives greenlit a separate, purpose-built facility, the Reatta Craft Center, on the outskirts of Lansing, Michigan. This was not an accident of geography. Lansing was picked for its distance from the daily churn of GM's major plants, a place where the rules could be rewritten without constant interference. Inside GM, this decision looked almost reckless. For decades, the company's muscle came from scale, hundreds of thousands of cars rolling off synchronized lines, every minute accounted for, every motion standardized. The Reatta Craft Center would break that rhythm. Here, teams of workers would build cars in stations, not on a moving line. Each Reatta would spend hours at a time in one spot, getting attention from a handful of specialists. The goal was not speed, but precision. The building itself was a statement, separate from the main Buick City complex, but close enough to draw on Lansing's skilled labor pool. Construction began in 1986. The plant was designed for flexibility, not volume. Its projected output was just 20,000 cars a year, a fraction of what a standard GM facility produced in a single month. The Craft Center would have its own management, its own culture, and a mandate to ignore the usual metrics of mass production. This isolation was deliberate. GM's leadership wanted to shield the Reatta from the pressures that shaped every other product in the portfolio. No shortcuts, no forced parts sharing, no push to hit arbitrary numbers. The Craft Center was supposed to be a laboratory, a place to prove that American workers could match or even exceed the quality coming out of Japan and Germany. If the experiment succeeded, it might change how GM thought about building cars altogether. If it failed, it would fail quietly, away from the main stage. By the time the first workers clocked in, the stakes were clear. The Reatta Craft Center existed to do what the rest of GM could not: build a car by hand, at scale, inside a system designed for something else entirely. Inside the Reatta Craft Center, the daily rhythm felt nothing like a typical General Motors plant. Instead of a single line pushing cars from one end of the building to the other, the floor was divided into team cells. Each cell was staffed by a small group of cross-trained workers, technicians who rotated through jobs and built up a deep knowledge of the car and each step required to finish it. There were no moving assembly lines, no relentless conveyor belts. A Reatta would arrive at a station and stay put, while a team handled everything from major sub-assemblies to delicate trim. When it passed one quality gate, it moved on to the next cell. Every car faced multiple checkpoints, with team members empowered to stop work if they spotted a flaw. This approach meant that responsibility for quality was built into the process, not tacked on at the end. Workers took pride in their roles, often signing off on their own work before sending a car to the next stage. The result was an environment where craftsmanship wasn't just a slogan, it was a daily reality, visible in the careful fit of panels and the feel of the controls. The pride among the Craft Center teams ran deep. Many of these workers had years of experience at other General Motors plants, but here they found something different: the chance to build a car that felt personal even as it wore a Buick badge. Dealers across the country quickly realized the Reatta was a different kind of Buick, but not always in a way that made their jobs easier. The car's price tag landed just above $25,000 in 1988, pushing it into direct competition with established luxury coupes from Europe and Japan. At that level, buyers expected not just a premium badge, but engineering pedigree and performance to match. For most Buick showrooms, the Reatta's hand-built story was hard to translate into sales. The average customer walked in expecting a discount, not a halo, and balked at paying more for a two-seater Buick than for a larger, more powerful Riviera, or even a Cadillac Eldorado. Behind the scenes, the economics were even rougher. The Craft Center's low-volume, station-based approach meant every Reatta carried a mountain of fixed overhead. Where a typical GM plant spread costs across hundreds of thousands of units, the Reatta's annual output struggled to break 7,000. Each car soaked up a disproportionate share of plant expense, engineering, and marketing. The math was relentless. Even with strong initial buzz, the Reatta's per-unit cost outpaced its sticker price. Dealers felt the squeeze, caught between corporate optimism and showroom resistance. The numbers did not lie. No matter how well the car was built, the market refused to pay for GM's experiment. The end came not with headlines or fanfare, but with a spreadsheet. In 1991, General Motors finance leadership gathered the numbers and delivered their verdict. The Reatta's future was measured against the needs of the entire company. Every dollar tied up in the Craft Center was a dollar that could be redeployed elsewhere, on new trucks, high-volume sedans, or the next round of technology for mainstream models. The Reatta's low output and high fixed costs made it an easy target. On paper, the opportunity cost was clear. General Motors could not justify keeping a boutique operation alive when the same capital promised better returns in other parts of the portfolio. The decision was clinical. There were no public statements about failure or disappointment. Executives simply notified managers at the Craft Center that production would cease. The last Reatta rolled out in May 1991. Equipment was reassigned, workers were transferred, and the building itself was quietly repurposed for other projects. The Craft Center's brief existence ended not with a scandal, but with a line item on a balance sheet. For the General Motors finance team, it was a logical reallocation, one more adjustment in the constant push to maximize returns and reduce risk. The experiment was over, not because it could not build a great car, but because the math no longer worked. Today, the pressure to balance innovation with scale is fiercer than ever. Every automaker faces the same hard calculus: craft or cost, vision or volume. Reatta's story reminds us, great ideas alone do not survive in a spreadsheet world. In business, even excellence has to add up.